All right, so today we're looking at Western Europe in the post-classical era. And this is commonly referred to as the Middle Ages in Europe or sometimes as the medieval period in Europe. But it was quite a bit different from what we saw in Eastern Europe. If you remember Eastern Europe, we had the Byzantine Empire, which maintained, for the most part, strong centralized rule in Eastern Europe throughout the Middle Ages. We're going to see something very different develop in the West. So after the fall of the Roman Empire, the eastern half, if you remember, survived as the Byzantine Empire. And we already kind of went into detail on the Byzantine Empire. But the western half of the empire is going to be invaded. And that starts with the Huns who kind of pushed into Europe. But ultimately, the importance of the Huns is they drove all these Germanic peoples who had been on the outskirts of the Roman Empire into that Western Roman Empire. And they flooded into the Western Roman Empire. They're going to bring an end to the Roman Empire in 476 CE. And all of these different Germanic peoples, the Visigoths, the Ostrogoths, the Lombards, the Franks, carved out their own territory in Western Europe. And what they brought with them was a very different culture than what had existed under the Roman Empire. The German peoples typically organized themselves around family groups or clans, and they were loyal to a local king, not to the idea of an entire state or empire. And you had a strong warrior aristocracy that really initially made up the kind of upper class, your typical aristocracy. And so it was very different from what the old Roman Empire had been. So one of these groups were the Franks. And the Franks are going to settle in modern-day northern France in Germany. And under Clovis is going to begin to expand his territory in Western Europe. And he was a strong leader for the Franks and ultimately is going to launch campaigns against these other Germanic peoples in Western Europe and going to build one of the largest states in Western Europe. Another big turning point for Clovis is his conversion to Christianity. And he converted mostly for the prestige that it gave him. If he converted to Christianity, he thought it would give him kind of power over his other rivals. And ultimately what it did is it created this kind of close alliance with the Roman Catholic Church in the West. And in the end, it did greatly strengthen the Franks as well. And he's going to work to convert the Germanic peoples to Roman Christianity. So Clovis and the Franks are going to begin this huge dynasty. Now his family lineage is going to die out after his death, but the Carolingians are going to take control of the Frankish people. And this is going to begin the Carolingian dynasty. Charles Martel is the founder of the Carolingian dynasty, and he's going to win some credit in Christianity when he defeats the Muslims at the Battle of Tours. And so the Muslims had taken over most of Spain, and they were pushing into modern-day France. And Charles Martel defeats them at the Battle of Tours, and it wasn't necessarily due to the strength of the Carolingian Empire. It was more due to the fact that by this time the Muslims were exhausted and kind of overstretched themselves. But nonetheless, he does defeat the Muslims. And the importance of this is it kind of keeps the Muslims out of the rest of Western Europe, and it helped preserve Christianity in Western Europe. And so one of the successors of Charles Martel was Charlemagne. And Charlemagne is really going to build the closest thing we have to a true empire in Western Europe. He's going to take control and expand into northeastern Spain, into northern Italy, and creates a fairly centralized government. He relied quite a bit on kind of regional counts, these upper aristocracy deputies that helped oversee his empire, but he's going to be proclaimed emperor by the church. And so this is another example of that growing relationship between the kings and emperors of Western Europe and the Roman Catholic Church. He's also going to restore some church-based education and create a new capital as well. But ultimately, the empire of Charlemagne was short-lived. After his death, the empire is going to be divided into three separate kingdoms, and from there, further subdivided. And for most of the rest of the Middle Ages in Western Europe, we're going to see smaller regional states instead.